Hello and welcome to Quo Vadis China, a podcast organized by the Eastern Europe Studies Center. I'm Raghudas Boruta, an associate expert for the China Research Program. China and India have been in contact for thousands of years, but the harmony that often defined their historical ties seems to be long gone in the modern times. Owing to border disputes after the annexation of Taiwan, Tibet by the People's Republic of China resulted in the 1962 Sino-Indian War. However, in the 80s, both countries began to show signs that they might be able to handle their differences and keep peace on the border, which was formalized during the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's visit in 1988. Nowadays, China is India's largest neighbor. It is also India's second largest trading partner. But at the same time, China is also treated as India's primary external rival. Those tensions have reemerged in recent years, significantly affecting almost every aspect of Indian foreign policy. Moreover, what happens between India and China affects not only their bilateral ties, but also the region and arguably the whole world. To help me unravel some of the complexities of the Sino-Indian ties, as well as better understand how India views itself and its place in the world, my guest today is Dr. Kumari Mansi, an assistant professor at Amity University, Haryana, India. Currently, Dr. Mansi is conducting research in Taiwan as a MOFA Taiwan Fellow at National Chengchi University. Her research topic is titled Evolving Power Dynamics in the Indian Ocean Region, Challenges and Opportunity for India-Taiwan Ties. Thanks for joining, Dr. Mansi.
Thank you, Mr. Boruta. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you.
That's glad to hear. So first of all, I think we should talk about this overall background when it comes to Sino-Indian bilateral relations. So first of all, how do you assess the Sino-Indian ties from a historical perspective? As I said, I think, as far as I know, from the historical perspective, before the modern times, the ties and cooperation was kind of peaceful. But so what happened in the modern times, and when the relations began to go downhill?
Okay, so yeah, it's a very important question. If we have to understand the contemporary India-China relations, we have to look into the history. Like you already mentioned that India and China coexisted peacefully historically, but in the modern times, we have one of the biggest border troubles and conflict. So if we talk about the first sign of the conflict, it can be traced back to 1958. Now, this was the time when the border dispute first came to the fore. Now, before that, I would like to mention here is that India was the first non-communist country to recognize People's Republic of China. India's relations with China started with the Republic of China, ROC, which is at present the Taiwan. But in 1949, when PRC came to power on the mainland, India was one of the first non-communist country to establish ties. And the then Prime Minister was very vocal on supporting China in UNSC. And he reiterated that PRC is a fact on ground which cannot be neglected. So you may ask what happened later that we got embroiled in so much of trouble, right? So 1950s, the beginning of 1950s, the sign of the emergence in the problem can be traced back because of, I broadly see there are two possible reasons. So before I get back to reasons, I'll give you a very brief insights into the point where these border dispute came to the fore. As I mentioned that it was in 1958. So what happened in 1958 was that the Chinese premier Zhao Enlai He was responding to Nehru's protest against the Aksai Chin Road. So this is 179 kilometers of road which China built. So here, when I say China, I'm referring to PRC, People's Republic of China, just to make the distinction. So this 179 kilometers of road, which was constructed by China, it ran through the Aksai Chin region, which was claimed by India. And this was the incident that they started constructing this road in the beginning of 1950s, and by 1958 the road was completed. So our Prime Minister Nehru that time, he protested. So the Chinese premier didn't like it, and he totally denied. And also that you could see that the Chinese map which they brought out that time, it totally denied for the first time the presence of any formalized border between China and India. Now, what happened in the preceding year from 1951 to 57? Now, this is the time period which can be defined as the peaceful time period into the bilateral relations. The things were good that time. In fact, this was the window of opportunity where you could see that say that the border issue could have been resolved, but it's a missed window of opportunity from the point where I see it. So it was actually the reluctance by both the countries, right? So the first major problem, or the first major factor which contributed to this entrenchment of border dispute, is basically the reluctance of both India and China to take up this matter in the initial phase, that was between 1950 to 1957. Now, this was a time when Sino-Indian relations were peaceful and amicable, and both the countries, they were having high level of diplomatic exchanges, and there was a lot of exchanges and talks going on between the leaders. So they had ample opportunity to settle the ambiguities which were left by the colonial history. However, both the countries, they just circumvented any boundary issue. They did not talk about it, and they just followed the unilateral policies and actions. For example, Indian government did not consult China before declaring the forwardmost post in the eastern and the western sectors, right? And India also, as you can say, that annexed Taiwan in 1958, and it published new maps reflecting India's unilateral demarcation. And India interpreted the Chinese silence as the acceptance or consent to the McMahon line, the line which was which basically demarcated India and Tibet that time, right? So there were some unilateral actions from Indian side and also from the Chinese side. Like from the Chinese side, what they did was they followed a strategy of delaying, right? So they were delaying. At the same time, they also refrained to formally protest against Delhi's unilateral move, like placing the forward most posts where we are placing the militaries on the forward positions. So China did not actually formally protest against all these unilateral moves. And at the same time, it also did not formally protest against New Delhi's unilateral move until China, the PRC or the PLA, has consolidated their administrative and military position in Tibet.
In the wake of these heightened tensions, and as you mentioned, there were several missed opportunities by India and China to solve these historical disputes. But what about the current state of bilateral ties, especially the economic trade ties? Is there any emphasis, like we see in more and more Western countries with regards to ties with China and de-risking from China. So is this the case in India, and is India trying to de-risk from China when it comes to especially economic ties?
Okay, so the current economic ties, right? So bilateral. Now you'll be surprised to know that diplomatically, India and China, the relations are not moving ahead. It's an impasse right now at the diplomatic level. But when you look at the economic level, the trade. The trade is booming. In fact, according to one figure, last year we had the record number of trade between the two countries, and the trade deficit was mostly in China's favor. So if I have to say how it is going on at the economic level, I would say that economically it is both the countries are working together. Because it's really very difficult to totally de-risk or delineate right now. At the symbolic level, you will see that after 2020, India banned a lot of Chinese apps. So a lot of Chinese apps were banned. At the same time, a lot of there is a lot of emphasis on make in India. So like you rightly said, that are we trying to diversify, are we trying to de-risk? I would say yes, but this is something which cannot be done overnight. Because here I will give you one example or one figure about the trade, India China trade. It in the first half of 2023, the trade decreased by 0.9% only, right? But if you compared it to the last year, the previous year, it was a record level. So in 2022, we had the trade worth 135.98 billion dollar, and it was an increase of 8.4% from the 2021 level, right? And since I told you that the trade deficit is huge, and it is basically mostly in China's favor. So in the year 2021, the trade deficit was $69.38 billion, which increased in 2022, and it was $101.02 billion. So you'll be surprised that okay, in 2020 we had this Galwan incidents and this whole diplomatic crisis issue at the border, governments not talking, total impasse. But how economy is so entrenched? Well, that is the reality. China is the biggest trade partner of almost every country on the globe these days, right? I might be a little exaggerating, but that's the fact. So when it comes to India also, we are trying to diversify. We are trying to focus more on this Make in India program. Now, this is the initiative launched by the Prime Minister Modi. A lot of emphasis is being given on the manufacturing sector within the country. At the same time, we are also working very closely with the ASEAN countries. If we just talk about Asia, we are working closely with ASEAN. We are working closely with Australia, Japan, US, Middle East. India has good terms with almost or most of the countries. So we are trying to diversify, but focus is more on the manufacturing sector, Make in India, because India has realized that our growth trajectory will not take off until unless we are able to manufacture within the country itself. So based on that, India did come up with some of the import bans or some of the strict rules and regulations on what are the things you can import. These are just to boost the manufacturing country, and we are also giving a lot of incentives for the foreign companies to come in India and manufacture in the India. So partner with us, work with us in the country, invest here, and there are incentives which also government is giving. So there is a huge focus on Make in India, and this has something to do with the China factor, right? But yeah, economy is moving. It is because it is well entrenched. Dipped a bit. That was in the first quarter. Second quarter, the figures are not out yet, so cannot make a comparison between last 2 years. But in the first quarter, it actually dipped to 0.9%.
Okay, as you said, the economy is still progressing and moving, and India is in this as some experts call it, silent rise. And it also can be observed that the country is increasingly vocal and active in international affairs. How does India see its place regionally and as well as globally? And how do you assess the India's efforts to surpass this regional powers confines to seek this more a bigger role in the global? How do you see this?
Okay, so firstly, let me start with how India sees the global order, or how India sees the world. What is India's perception? So according to India's perception, there are three superpowers or three great powers: the United States, which is diminishing, getting a diminishing influence or diminishing in power. Second superpower is China, which is rising very fast. And third is Russia, with its imperial nostalgia, right? But Russia is still a power. So, according to India, there are three superpowers, and India will see itself as a middle power. We are still not a superpower. We are rising. There is an emergence, but we are still not a great power. So what does India want, right? India aspires to become a major power in the international system. There is no doubt about it. Like any other country, we want to become a major player, a major power. To a certain extent, like you also mentioned that, there has been a subtle rise in India's international influence. That's true. To a certain extent, India has been able to establish itself as a dominant player in the region, an economic giant. Now you know that we are the fifth largest economy, and we are on way to become the third largest economy by the end of this decade. And at the same time, I also would like to underline here that we are a responsible nuclear power state, right? So from Indian side, I mean, we have been very responsible in being a nuclear state. So how it is going to pan out, and how is India's perception of the region is different from the China's perception, right? So how we see it is that there is a crucial global competition which involves the United States, China, and India in Asia, and I'm talking about the region in Asia. And India is and this triangle, the US, China, and India, this is something which is expected to define the coming era. Now, the United States definitely wants a unipolar world with itself at the top. China would try to have a bipolar world and a unipolar Asia. So in Asia, China would like to be at the top and the only major or the great power. However, when it comes to India, India will work towards a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia, right? So like we do have great power aspirations, and we are well aware of the fact that we still lack capability and resources. That's why for the time being, our focus is more on the economic growth, right? With the population 1.4 billion people now, we are the largest population. So poverty alleviation, uh, giving making food, fuel, fertilizers, or all these common necessity, available for the people of the country, that is right now the primary concern of the government. So economically, we are growing. More focus is on the economy right now, and if the economy increases, then certainly our capabilities will also increase. We have more money, we can spend more on modernization, military modernization, say for example, or technology, and on the other thing. But in the long run, India sees itself as a responsible power, as the only potential power in the region which has the capability to contain China, right? And India does not want a unipolar world or a unipolar Asia. India is looking for a multipolar Asia with the various power centers. So power should not be concentrated on the hand of few. It has to be shared. That's what the India's position is right now.
And when it comes to India's immediate neighborhood, it can be observed that China has established a quite strong foothold in countries as Nepal, Bangladesh, and China's influence reaches different sectors in those countries, with India in some aspects can be seen as losing some of its influence in this immediate periphery. How do you see China's greater engagement in India's immediate neighborhood, and how does India respond to China's increasing influence?
Yeah, now this is a cause of concern, right? India is concerned about increasing Chinese presence in the South Asia. So even in this broader Indo-Pacific framework, which everybody is talking about now, India's focus is going to be more on the Indian Ocean region and the South Asia. Now, you rightly mentioned that that China is increasing its foothold in Bangladesh, in Bhutan, Maldives. Like in Maldives now, we have a very pro-China government. In Sri Lanka, so this is a cause of concern. So how India is countering it, right? That is your question. So let me just start with the how we are trying to counter China's dominance in the region. Firstly, in the maritime domain. So like in the maritime domain, as you said, that all these Indian Ocean IOR countries, like you have Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mali, Mauritius. These are very important, and China has acquired bases there. The recent one has been in Djibouti, and they have this Hambantota port, which is there. So what India has done is India has good relations with these countries historically also, and under the present government, India has been or India was granted military access to the port of Guam. Sorry, not Guam, port of Dukam, if I'm pronouncing it right. It is in Oman, which is strategically situated between China's Gwadar port in Pakistan and Djibouti military base, right? So that's one. Similarly, India got military access to Changi Air Base in naval base in Singapore. This is very strategically located, and it is close to Malacca and Lombok and Sunda Strait. And you might be aware of the Malacca dilemma for China. At the same time, India has access to Sabang port in Indonesia. Then also a port in Vietnam, right? India and Japan, they are working very closely to develop some of these ports. On the land, now India gave an extension of around $500 million of credit line to Mongolia. Now that is deep, or this is more like a underbelly of China. Now in the immediate neighborhood, India is trying to promote, say for example, BBIN, right? Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal cooperation. Cooperation. Now, this is something you may say that something to counter the BRI initiative of China, because these are the countries which are a part of the BRI. Similarly, India is in Nepal, say for example, we're trying to build up this Lasha and Vikasi railway extension to in Nepal. And at the same time, we are also looking at, we are working closely with Japan for AAGs. This is the Asia Africa Growth Corridor. These are some of the points, these are some of the initiative or actions which has been taken by India to counter Chinese influence in the region, in South Asia and in IOR. And also recently, the external affairs ministers, he mentioned that we are working very closely with our friendly neighbors in building infrastructure, right? So that these friendly neighbors are Bangladesh, Bhutan, right? So we are working very closely in building infrastructure in these countries. In same case of Sri Lanka, India was the first one to offer the bailout. We did help out when Sri Lanka was undergoing such a financial crisis. We were the first one to help Lankans. We are actually worried about CPEC, uh, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. To counter that, India has a presence in Iran, Chabar port, which we developed with Japanese there, right? And during the G20, you remember that there was an announcement of IMEC. Now the situation in Israel is really deteriorating, and we don't know how the conflict is going to pan out. But that was also one of the initiative to counter China's influence in the region. So India has been proactive, and but at the same time cautious. India's stand for the time being is the benign containment of China, not a confrontation. So we are, if China is creating this string of pearls around our neck, then India is also trying to have its own necklace of diamond, which they call it, right? So to counterbalance China in the neighborhood, right? Yeah.
When it comes to full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine, I think this is the topic which I often try to cover when talking with experts from the region, because unlike in Lithuania, so we have quite similar approaches when it comes to this war. But when I talk with experts from the region, every country seems to have a different perception of this armed conflict, and I think especially India's position is very interesting in this regard. So first, I would like to know: does India see the Russo-Ukrainian war merely as this West and Russia conflict, or as an unacceptable country's aggression against another sovereign country?
India's position on Ukraine war, a very important question, right? So how India responded, and there has been criticism of India's response to the Ukrainian war. But what has been India's position? India has urged the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. India also called for the immediate cessation of violence and hostilities. And at the same time, India also in its statement said that we regret that the past path of diplomacy was given up, and urged both the parties to return to diplomacy. And the traditional position has been that dialogue is the only answer for settling differences and dispute. So dialogue, diplomacy, and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity is something which India has been calling for. However, India did not condemn Russia publicly. India has abstained from US-sponsored UNSC resolutions, which deplored Russia in a very strongest term. India has abstained. So did many of the other countries from the global south. If you look at the voting pattern right now, if you are asking me how India looks at it, or so for India, it is, see, if you have observed the trajectory of India's foreign policy and diplomacy, India does not believe in name calling. So here I would like to quote from, what our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru said back in 1957. Now, this was the time when it was just a year after the intervention in Hungary by Russia, and the Prime Minister was asked about India's position, and he was responding to a question in the Indian Parliament, and he says, and I quote, "There are many things happening in the world from year to year and day to day, which we have disliked intensely. We have not condemned them because when one is trying to solve a problem, it does not help calling names and condemning," unquote. Right. So India's position has been that we do not believe in name calling, but at the same time, India condemns any act of transgression or anything which has to do with territorial sovereignty. India has condemned it. India has, said that, and it calls for sovereignty and the territorial integrity. Now, in this particular case, how India sees is that it is an European problem. It is far off from, our land. So but India is saying that, okay, war in Ukraine is an European problem, right? Now, aggressive Russia is American and European problem. At the same time, NATO expansion is Russian problem. What is India's problem? India's problem is China, right? So China is our problem. Now, you look at the equation. US and Russia, both of them strategic partners for India. In fact, in case of Russia, Russia is the only country, right, with which we have a special and privileged strategic partnership. It is written in the agreement which we signed, right? So two of our partners, US and Russia, they are fighting with each other, and this might eventually benefit our rival, which is China. So biggest concern right now for India is China. And India is a continental power as well as a maritime power. So as a continental power, we need Russia to maintain the balance in this region, right? In Central Asia, in this Asia, and especially after the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan. At the same time, in the maritime domain, or if India has to become a maritime power, we need the United States. We have to counter China there, right? So what India has to do right now is to balance. We have to balance our continental security as well as the maritime security, right? And we have also realized that an isolated and a weak Russia is not in India's interest, right? It is more like pushing Russia towards China. And imagine if there is a China, Russia, and Pakistan nexus. Now, this is going to be totally detrimental for India's interest in the subcontinent, right? So this is the equation where India is trying to chart out or navigate its path. But India's position is that they condemn any act of aggression. What we don't do is that we do not believe in name calling. That's what India has been doing. It has not named Russia, but Modi told Putin that this is not the era of war. Diplomacy is something you need to get back to, right? So yeah, it's. I would say that India is not in favor of any sort of aggression. It is not our tradition, and at the same time, we do not believe in name calling. We condemn what we have to condemn without name calling. That's what India has been doing. And at the same time, what is more important to us is the national interest. We have to take care of our national interest and do whatever it takes to maintain that national interest. I think every other country will do that.
And when it comes, as you have mentioned, this privileged partnership between China and Russia, and how does the current state of relations between India and Russia look like? I mean, since the invasion of Ukraine began, especially when it comes to the trade ties, there is a sign that the ties have became quite
More.
significantly stronger
Yep. That's
compared to the time before. So how does the current state of the ties look like?
Oh, there is not much of a change in the relationship, I would say. The
Mhm.
only concern right now for India is that because Russia is engaged in the war, they are delaying or they are being short of delivering the equipments or the military equipments which we were purchasing from them. So that is one of the concerns that Russia has been delaying. But at the same time, if you look at India's defense cooperation, India has been diversifying, right? So in the percentage of what India used to import from China, sorry, from Russia has been, slowing down. But this is something which is going to take time. So we are importing from the United States, from France, from Israel. Now Israel is also in war. So one of our biggest concern would be that uh, our defense equipments, right? Now, this is also interesting to know that India and Russia, their cooperation in the defense was the most important feature of the bilateral ties, and this has continued. In fact, more than 90% of Indian army, armored vehicles, say for example, or 69% of the combat aircraft which is used by Air Force, Indian Air Force and Navy, and 44% of the Navy submarines and warships are Russian. So this is the kind of engagement India and Russia had for a very very long time, and in between. 2011 to 2021, only Russia accounted for 60% of the weapon imports in India. This is as per one of the CIPRI's report, right? So Russia has been one of the India's biggest arms supplier, but as I said, that the share has decreased. So from 2017 or in between 2017 and 22, the import from Russia decreased from 62% to 45%. Right, so there is a steady decrease. So because we are also diversifying, because we also realize that we need not to put all the eggs in the same basket. So we are importing from US, from France, Israel, and UK also, right? So this was in terms of the defense import and the defense cooperation. Now if you look at, because you ask how the relationships are relationship between these two countries are right now you look into the different domain, the economic relationship, how it has increased in last 2 years. Say for example, India's import of Russian oil rose tenfold, right? So there has been an increase, 10 times increased in what India imported from Russia, right? So this figure will tell you that Asia's third largest economy saved around $5 billion, right? So
Mhm.
when we are importing 10 times more from Russia, we are saving a lot of money, right? That helped us not to slide into inflation like the other countries, right? So economy. So here the economic factor. Uh, Say, for example, in 2021, Russian oil only accounted for 2% of India's annual crude oil import. So, what we are importing are the heavy oils, the crude oils. Now, that 2% became 10%, sorry, 20%. So, 10 times increased. And how much did we save? That is around $89 per ton of crude oil. That's something. And in total, we saved around $5 billion. Yeah, $5 billion dollar we saved. Now this helped us to maintain our inflation, and at the same time, uh, Russia became our fifth largest trading partner in 2023, and we traded around $41.5 billion. So that was the worth of import. And The another factor, the another field or another domain where Russia helped us, or no, we traded with Russia, that is the fertilizers. That also comes in the wake of the fact that China put a export ban on its fertilizers. So India went to Russia. So India imported 7.74 million tons of Russian fertilizers. So about two-thirds of all the fertilizers were imported from Russia itself, right? And Russia became one of the India's top supplier of chemicals and fertilizers both. Not just that, India's import of Russian coal and sunflower oil has also jumped up, and now Russia has become the 10th largest source of import to Russia. To India. So that has been the trajectory of India and Russia economic or the trade relations in the last 2 years. The only concern for India right now is that the delay in getting the military equipment, and the fact that it might be halted. So India has to find the alternative.
Yeah, so I think there is no dispute that India is on this track to become a one more superpower, and it's very interesting to see how India like develops. It's like quite distinctive foreign policy that is often based on this balancing between the other world powers. But unfortunately, the time is running out, and I'd like to thank you, Dr. Mansi, once again for sharing your truly interesting insights that help to better understand the complexities and the context behind not only the Sino-Indian rivalry, but also with regards to increasing India's role in the world. So I would like to wish you a great and productive remaining stay in Taiwan. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Mr. Baruta. Thank you so much for this exciting talk. I really enjoyed a lot talking to you. Thank you so much for extending me this invitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.